Hello, and welcome to this introduction session. My name is Jeremy, and I'm a product specialist at Abstract, and today I'm going to walk you through the features and functionalities that InstaLOD has to offer. Today we're going to primarily focus on our standalone application, InstaLOD Studio. However, we also have integrated plugins for Autodesk Maya, Autodesk 3ds Max, Blender, Unreal Engine, Unity, and Autodesk VRED. Now, in addition, we also have a command line application called InstaLOD Pipeline, which allows you to set up batch processes very quickly and easily, and I'll show you how to do that later on. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the first thing I'd like to show you today is how to import native CAD files and prepare them so that they can be rendered using any render engine. This involves converting the CAD NURBS data into polygons, generating UVs, combining materials to reduce draw calls, and optimizing the polygon count. Now, in the process of doing so, I'm also going to show you how we can make this a scalable workflow that you can apply to any incoming CAD or mesh information, meaning that you'll be able to apply this as a batch process for large amounts of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a CATIA file. I'm just going to drag and drop it into InstaLOD Studio. Now, InstaLOD's automatically going to recognize if there's any NURBS information present. It's going to show me this CAD import dialog. And you can see we have the assemblies on the left here, all the parts, and then we have our tessellation settings on the right. So I'm just going to import with default settings for now. And now you can see that InstaLOD has tessellated the NURBS information into polygons. Now, the first thing that I want to do here is set up my environment settings and also assign some materials. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to better understand while I'm tessellating and optimizing this mesh here, if my shading breaks, for example. I want to make sure I see those errors. It's quite difficult to do so with this plain white matte material. And also I can understand more of the shading if I adjust the environment background image as well. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to assign a studio light here, which makes it easy to see the reflections more. Then I'm going to go to my material editor here, and I'm going to use the filter. Now, anything I have selected here, it's going to show me the material that's assigned to this selected object. I'm going to increase the metalness, and then I'm also going to create a new material here. I'll just call it red for now, and I'm going to assign it to the outer part of this rim, and I'm going to make it red. Go ahead and make it a little more shiny, and there we go. So now I can better see the shading while I'm tessellating this object. So now what I can do is I can use something called our CAD Live Link. And what this lets us do is it lets us to retessellate the CAD information after we've imported the NURBS information. It has a direct link to the NURBS information. Now I can retessellate using the same settings that we just saw in the CAD import dialog. So let's just go over some of those settings now. We have this maximum deviation number. That is a quality threshold, which we'll talk about in a second. We have the maximum edge length. We also have this maximum angle. Now, the maximum angle, what it does is it finds the angle between two polygons, and if we exceed that threshold, then we add subdivisions to stay within that angle. So what I'm going to do is change this maximum angle. Let me go ahead and select a part here. We can see the wireframe. And what I'm looking at here is the curvature. And if I decrease the angle, we should get better curvature here. So if I go ahead and change this from 45 down to 20, what I can do is hit retessellate here. And now you can see we have more subdivisions along the curvature of this rim. Now this is great, but we still have two problems here. Yes, we have better curvature, but as I decrease this, this threshold of the maximum angle, what if we have small pieces like screws, which are small and quite round? What we might end up with is screws with 50,000 polygons, and that's not what we're going for here. Also, another problem has to do with these flat surfaces. If I want to add subdivisions across the flat surfaces, well, what I'm going to have to do is lower this maximum angle down to 3 degrees. And if I hit retessellate, you can see, well, yes, we now have subdivisions along the flat surfaces, but we also have a heavily tessellated mesh around the curvature. So this isn't a very viable option as well. So what we can do instead of using this maximum angle is we can use the maximum deviation. So what this maximum deviation does, again, it's that quality threshold that I talked about before, but it tessellates based on a level of quality that we specify with this threshold number. So we can decide what the level of quality is going to be using just this single value. So for example, if I go ahead and change this to 0.01, which I highly recommend if you're first starting to use the maximum deviation number, start off with a number like 0.01, and I'll go ahead and retessellate. And now you can see that we do have the flat surfaces tessellated, and we have a nice curvature around these spokes of the rim as well. So this is one of the common themes that you're going to see here in InstaLOD, which is that we have these scalable parameters. That's what this maximum deviation is. It's a scalable parameter, meaning that no matter which mesh or which set of NURBS information passes through this workflow that we're creating, it's always going to give you the level of quality that you specify, which makes it a very batchable and scalable process. So the next thing I'm going to do to continue my tessellation setup here is I'm going to set a maximum edge length of 1. So now instead of tessellating one piece at a time, I'm just going to select the root node here, which selects everything, and I'm going to hit retessellate. And now you can see with that maximum edge length, we have a much more even distribution of polygons across the mesh. It's giving us a really more uniform tessellation, which looks really, really nice. So the tessellation is looking good, but I want to make sure that my shading is okay too. And you might have noticed that we do have some shading errors. You can see that in between the different spokes on this rim, we have some shading splits. Now, the reason why this is happening is because there's two patches in the CAD data and the normals are pointing in the wrong directions. And before, what an artist would have to do is they would have to go into the CAD software and fix each of these individually, which is a very manual process and very tedious. But luckily what we can do is we can fix this here within InstaLOD Studio. We have a couple ways of doing that. So I'm going to select the piece and I can go over to the shading section here of the CAD Live link, and I can say recalculate normals, and then hit retessellate. And so now you can see that we have actually fixed the issue between the spokes of the rim, but we've also introduced some other issues because we recalculated based on an angle threshold, which was compatible for this part of the mesh, but not so good for this part along the side. You might be able to see some of those singularities here. So instead what I can do is I can use a feature called Shading Magic. So I'll just turn this off, choose Shading Magic and set it to normal, hit retessellate, and now you can see that both the splits on the inner side of our rim are fixed and we no longer have those singularities along the side. And what Shading Magic does is it goes into the NURBS information and figures out where those problematic areas are and fixes the shading for us. So I'm happy with the tessellation now, I'm happy with the shading, but there's still some problems to solve. One problem is that I had to apply all these materials manually, and you can see, we have 4 materials on this singular rim, and if we scale this to, multiple wheels and rims and even an entire vehicle or multiple vehicles, this can become a very tedious process, especially if I'm trying to do this with an offline render where I need to set up all these materials individually, or if I'm going to do this for real time, that can result in a lot of draw calls, which is another problem that we have, where if I want to apply this process to a large assembly, we're starting to get hundreds and hundreds of pieces and hundreds of draw calls, and that usually is one of the main main issues when it comes to rendering real time these days. So we also can't apply any textures to this mesh, because if I go to the UV viewer here, you can see that we have really bad UVs. Let me just make this a bit larger here and I'll go ahead and zoom in. You can see this is the typical type of UVs that you might find from CAD information, and we can't assign any textures to this mesh using this type of UV layout. So we need to create a UV layout here in InstaLOD. And finally, another issue that we want to tackle today is the poly count. We have this beautiful uniform distribution across the wheel here, but it's 80,000 polygons for a single rim, and that certainly doesn't scale as well. So let's tackle all these problems individually. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to create a new profile. So I'll go to File, New Profile. Now, what is a profile? A profile is the file that you save out from InstaLOD Studio, and it contains all the settings and mesh operations that are applied to the incoming geometry. It's all the steps that we're creating in our workflow. And so I'm creating a new profile here, and the first thing that I want to do is a UV unwrap. So I'll go ahead and bring that in. You can see our mesh operation is set to UV unwrap, and we're going to take a look at a bunch of these operations today in our session, but I'm just going to go ahead and set this to a hard surface axial algorithm and hit start. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this operation, and you can see we now have a beautiful UV layout for our rim. Now, the next thing that I want to do is a material merge. And so if I go ahead and click material merge as the operation that I'd like to perform, what a material merge does is it combines all of the materials that we have in this scene into one set of textures. So you see we have 4 different materials. We're going to combine this all into one material and bake all the information into a set of textures instead of individual parameters. And this does a lot of things for us. For example, what it can do is make it so that not only do we have less materials, which means we have less draw calls, but also it means that I can consistently render out this rim in any render engine, whether it be offline or online, because it's all referencing the same texture data. So let's go ahead and run the operation here. I'll just go ahead and say, let's include the roughness and metalness information from the materials that they have assigned. And I'm going to bake out a 2K texture here. But behind the scenes, what InstaLOD's going to do is actually create a 4K texture because we have super sampling. So what super sampling does is it multiplies the original resolution that we have here by a factor. That factor in this case is ×2. We could do ×4, ×8. So it's going to do a 2K texture times 2, we get a 4K texture, and it's going to bake a 4K texture with all that quality, but then sample it down into 2K so we get a smaller file size. So I'll go ahead and hit start. Now it says we've already processed this scene once. Do you want to process the original scene, or do you want to process the already processed one? And I'm going to say processed because we have our UVs. Now this brings up a really good point. For the material merge operation to work, we already need to have UVs. It's not going to unwrap new UVs for us. It's going to take the UVs shells that we have and repack them to essentially create a texture atlas. And so if I go ahead and click on the root node here, and I go ahead and look at my textures, you can see that we have all of the base color baked into a single map. We also have the roughness information, and you can see we have the metalness. In this case, anywhere that's white is metallic, anywhere that is black is not a metal. And so now with these 3 maps, I have everything I need to represent this rim in any render engine very consistently. So we've solved the problem. If I go ahead and click on the filter here in the material editor, you see anything I click on is going to reference the same material. However, we still have 4 draw calls, and that's because we have 4 different meshes all calling upon one material. So we get those 4 draw calls. So to lower the draw call count, we can combine these different objects together. So to do that, we can use another one of our mesh operations, which is the mesh toolkit. Now, the mesh toolkit is a fantastic mesh operation because it takes all of these different fixes and operations that you might do in a DCC application, where you do vertice welding and you have fixed non-manifold geometry and flip normals and fill holes, and it's all combined into one operation. Now, I want to mention that you can use the mesh operation version of the mesh toolkit, but you can also take advantage of the same operations from the mesh menu at the top. So for example, you want to select an object, go to the mesh menu, you can say, I want to weld these vertices. You can do that right away while you're working within InstaLOD Studio. Very, very handy. So in this case, I want to apply this across the whole scene. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the mesh operation version and choose combine meshes. Go ahead and hit start. I'm going to use the process scene already, and there we go. You can see we have one mesh with one material, now with one draw call. So this is great, but however, we still have the issue, which is the polygon count. So we have, of course, we have our UVs and we have all our materials, and we've tested this from CAD data, but now we want to start optimizing this down a little bit more. And there's many ways that we can do this within InstaLOD. So one example might be to use our Polygon Optimizer, for example, or we could even create an imposter if we wanted to, but in this case, I want to use the remesher. Now, I'm going to quickly set up these settings, and then I'll explain what the remesher does. Set my UVs to hard surface axial. I'm going to check my textures, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit start. So what does the remesher do? Well, the remesher does the complete reconstruction of the mesh. It's going to create a brand new mesh from scratch. It's then going to unwrap the UVs of that new reconstruction, and then it's going to bake all the texture information and high poly information from the original mesh onto this new low poly version. It does this all within one step. And you can see already we're done. This is the newly reconstructed mesh. It now has 7,000 polygons. And if I go ahead and show you, we get beautiful results. And this is pretty amazing considering the fact that we just did a remesh on a laptop. And this is all happening locally on my machine. You know, typically these remesh operations would happen on a server, which you run for a couple of hours or even overnight. But in this case, you can see this all happened in just a matter of seconds here during this demonstration. And here's the wireframe that we've generated. Again, a completely new mesh from scratch. And even if I zoom in here, you can see that the shading looks absolutely perfect. I'll go ahead and click on this here. You can see we have our new UVs, and we have our roughness map and our metalness map. And we have this normal map as well, and this contains all of the curvature and the high poly details from the original mesh. So you might be wondering, why did I do this at the end? We already had new UVs. We already merged our materials together. We already combined everything together into one mesh. Why did I run this remesh operation at the end? Well, it has to do with the scalability and the type of the workflow that I want to build. So you can imagine we're not going to work one rim at a time. I want to be able to process, multiple rims or even an entire vehicle. How can I take everything that we've done and make this a scalable operation? Well, we've actually already done it. And you might have noticed across the top here, we have this timeline, which is extremely useful while you're running mesh operations in InstaLOD Studio. For example, I could go back to the UV unwrap and then I could go in a different direction on how I'd like to optimize this. But really what I want to do is press this little down triangle here, and I want to choose Convert Timeline to Profile. And so now all of the operations that we've just performed have been converted into a brand new profile, which is again the file that we save out in InstaLOD Studio. And now I can go and edit these things, and I can adjust maybe how I want to do the UV unwrap or change what I do with the mesh toolkit. But what's great is that the output of each operation is now being fed into the input of the next. What's even more cool is that I can use this little circle with an arrow to tell InstaLOD Studio at which step in the process would you like to export a copy of this new mesh. So maybe just after the UV unwrap, I could choose this option here, and I'll get an FBX of that. Or maybe what I want to do is export a copy of the mesh at the mesh toolkit stage. And what I can do now is I can export this high poly version that I have from the mesh toolkit, which has the UVs and the combined materials, but also I can export the low poly version from the remesher as well. So effectively, I'm taking this CAD information, I'm tessellating it, and now I'm getting it ready in both a high poly and a low poly version, all from one profile, which is really, really powerful. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this here. I'll go ahead and hit start. And it's going to do both of these or all these operations at the same time. But I also wanted to mention, if I wanted to run this as a batch process, and I want to show you how we could batch process this profile that we just created using our command line application. So I'm going to type in InstaLOD CMD. That's our command line application, which is called InstaLOD Pipeline. And I could use the command profile. And let's say that we saved out this profile as rim.json. Now, all of our profiles are JSON files, so you can go ahead and manually adjust them. It just contains a list of all of the different settings that it is that you've set up here in InstaLOD Studio. And then I can use the command -file, which would now is exactly what we're doing here in InstaLOD Studio. It's running the profile on a singular file. Or what I could do is I could type in folder. And now I can run this profile across all the meshes, all the CAD files in this case, in a singular folder. It's going to generate both the high poly and the low poly for me. And this will even run recursively if I wanted it to, with all the folders within inside that folder. So you can see how easy it is to start setting up a batch process this way. So now if I go back, you can see this is already done, and we have two versions of this mesh. You can see I have, they're two actually on top of one another. So I'm going to click the filter here, which means anything that I have selected is going to visually filter out here in the viewport. So you can see I now have my low poly version and my high poly version all generated from a singular profile, a singular workflow that we've just created. So this is great. This is a really batchable process, but it's not entirely scalable yet because there were still a lot of things that I had to do manually. For example, we imported initially this rim into InstaLOD Studio using the default tessellation settings, and then we had set up our own tessellation settings that we wanted to customize. Also, I had to manually apply some materials. So I had to change the metalness. I had to add the red part around the rim, for example, make things shiny. Again, another manual process. And now maybe there's other things that you want to do to process this CAD assembly. For example, maybe you want to reorganize the hierarchy and rename some things so that artists further down the line can understand which parts go together. Or maybe you want to remove pieces that are so small that you don't actually need them for the visualization. Again, all these things are very manual processes, but all these things and more we can do and automate within InstaLOD Studio using something called our Scene Rules system. What Scene Rules allow us to do is dive into the incoming mesh information and extract different attributes and characteristics from that data. We can then use that data to apply actions in an automated fashion. These actions can be anything from creating or assigning materials, tessellating CAD data with specific settings, changing the scene hierarchy, and much more. Now in the next section, I'd like to show you how we can apply scene rules to our CAD rim example so that we can automate all the steps that we had to do in order to prepare it for our high to low poly workflow. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create a new profile, and I'm just going to use the optimize operation as the first operation to choose from. And then I'm also going to re-import the rim. And so I'll go ahead and bring it in with the default settings, and you can see we're starting here from scratch. We have no materials assigned. We're using the default tessellation settings, and I want to adjust those a little bit with our custom settings. And I also think I want to clean up a little bit of the hierarchy as well. So how can we do this in an automated fashion? Well, we can use our scene import rules. I'm going to show you how these work. So if I go to the scene import rules tab here, I'm going to create a new entry, and I'm going to call it tessellate. And so now there are two parts to a scene rule. We have the predicate and the attribute. So the predicate is what is it that we want to do to the incoming geometry. So we can do things like move, we can split meshes, we can assign materials, create materials, we can tessellate here, you can see that. We can delete objects, for example. And so now that we know what we want to do with them, how are we going to identify which meshes to do this action to? Well, that's what the attribute does. The attribute says, what type of information are we going to match with so that we can now perform this predicate and perform this scene rule? And so in this case, you can see we have things like the path in the hierarchy, or the name, or the vertex count, or even things like the depth in the hierarchy, or which material is assigned to this particular mesh, for example. We can identify all these different pieces of criteria. So in this case, let's say I want to delete anything that's smaller than 5 centimeters. So we already have the predicate set to delete. Let me go ahead and find the mesh bounding sphere radius, and I can say something like anything smaller than 5 centimeters. And so now right on import, as the scene gets imported into InstaLOD, anything smaller than 5 centimeters is immediately going to be deleted. Another example is, let's say I want to fill holes on this scene automatically. So what I could do is I could say, well, how do I identify a hole? Well, I can find the mesh vertex boundary count, and I can say anything that's greater than 3, for example, 3 boundary vertices. And so now the predicate for this, which is really powerful, if we look at this, we can use the entire mesh toolkit that we talked about earlier as a scene rule. And so I can do all these things like vertex welding and conforming and flipping normals and things like that. And I can also, as you can see, fill holes right here. It's extremely powerful. And this is a great example of how you can see another scalability aspect to InstaLOD, in which case these rules don't just apply to one singular mesh in one singular file, but now we can identify all these properties in any incoming mesh data for batch processes and things like that. So again, a reminder, these scene rules get applied upon import before any of the mesh operations take place. So now let's take a look at an example on how this might apply to our CAD rim example. So I'm just going to delete this scene rule, create a new one. Again, I'll call it tessellate. And so now how do I want to determine what pieces I want to tessellate and in which way? And so if we take a look at the hierarchy, you can see we have two parts here that have the word body in them. We have the inner part of the rim and the outer part. So what I can do is I can go to my predicate, I'll find tessellate. And then for the attribute, I'm going to use the name attribute, because what we can do is use regular expressions. So if I type in something like body.star, now we can see that anything that has the word body in it at the beginning, it's going to identify. And then anything after the word body doesn't matter. As long as it has the body keyword at the beginning, it will now apply these tessellation settings to them. I'm just going to remove the UV viewer here. You can see we have the same tessellation settings that we had from the CAD Live link. So for example, I'll type in what I typed in before, 0.01 for the maximum deviation, 1 for the maximum edge length. We'll apply our shading magic. And so now I'm going to go ahead and say preview, and you can see that it's matched with these two pieces here. I can preview what parts of the scene hierarchy that we have here are going to match with this scene rule to make sure it works. So if I go ahead and do something like process this, if I turn off the filter, you can see we've now properly tessellated these objects with that criteria we've assigned. Really, really powerful. So you can start to see how these different rules can really shape this very scalable workflow, but it gets even more powerful because we can use custom metadata from our meshes to use as attributes. So for example, if we take a look at this object here, if I click here and I go to the object inspector, you can see that we have some custom attributes assigned to this rim, things like the internal ID or the original path or things like that. And we can use this criteria to match in our scene rules. So for example, if I want to find the original ID, I'll just copy this here, go to my attribute and paste it in. And then what do I want to match with? Well, let's match with this particular number. There we go. And now we have a very specific scene rule that will identify this particular term in this CAD file. So for example, if you have a part earlier on in the pipeline, a process in your pipeline that puts that metadata and assigns it to this information, then you can extract that out when you process it with InstaLOD later on. So this is a very specific scene rule, but as you saw before, we also have very general global scene rules as well. So it can get very specific or continue to be more adaptive with those global scene rules changes. So now the next thing that I want to do is I want to set up our scene just like we did initially in the beginning of our CAD demo, but I want to do it with scene rules. Now we could go ahead and create these scene rules manually, but instead I want to show you a more powerful way and a quicker way of setting up these rules, and that's by recording them. So I'm going to delete this scene rule. I'm just going to go ahead and hit record. And now every action that I perform is now going to be recorded as a scene rule. So let's go ahead and first start by assigning materials. But before I do that, let me just go ahead and re-import this rim, just so we're starting from scratch here. Okay, so we're still recording our scene. Well, let's go ahead. I'll hit record again. Let's go ahead and assign those materials. So I'll create a, let's go ahead and select this one. Apply the metalness. I'll go ahead and create a new material, call it red. And let's apply it to the outside. Set it to red here and adjust the roughness. There we go. So that's looking good. Now let's do the tessellation step. So I'll go ahead and go to my CAD Live link, set the maximum deviation again to 0.01, maximum edge length of 1, and get that shading magic again. Go ahead and select all of our pieces and hit retessellate. That's looking great. Now let's clean up the hierarchy a little bit. You can see we have some extra pieces here. So I have this offset, which was probably good when creating the rim in CAD, but it's not really useful for the visualization. So I'll go ahead and remove it. We also have this very, very small plane. Again, not very useful. So I'll remove that too. And now I want to rename these pieces. So let's see, we've got this inner part. I'll call it inner. And we have this outer part as well. And then I'm going to rename the root node rim. And so now you can see in our scene rules, just go ahead and hit finish here. Everything that I've done has now been recorded as a rule, and I won't have to do these manually ever again. So what I can do, I'll go ahead and re-import this rim. And now it tells me the profile that you have currently has import rules. Would you like to run them right away? In this case, I'm not for effect. I'll go ahead and just say, I don't want to process them now, but let's just go ahead and import everything with default settings. So again, we have no materials, no custom tessellation, and the hierarchy hasn't been cleaned up yet. Now what I can do is go to the scene rules and hit process. And now everything has automatically been applied with the materials, the hierarchy cleaned up, and our new tessellation settings. So it's a very scalable, powerful system that we can use to build this into the profiles that we create with InstaLOD Studio. And what's even more powerful is even though these particular rules can be applied on import, we can also take advantage of the scene rules system with particular mesh operations with something called our mesh match rules. And so what these do is these apply the same kind of criteria, not to the global scene, but just for a very specific mesh operation. So for example, let's say that I want to optimize something, let's say optimize anything that has the car paint material assigned to it. So I have my optimizer set up here with my optimized settings. I can go to the mesh match rules and add a new one. In this case, you can see we have our attribute here. So in this case, I'll type in, let's see, mesh material name of car paint. And so now anything that has the material car paint assigned will now be optimized with these settings. And I can create another mesh operation here, for example. Let's call it remesh. Anything that's smaller than 5 centimeters, for example. I'll go ahead and choose the remesher and then create a new mesh match rule. And let's say mesh bounding sphere radius is, what did I say, smaller than 5. And so now anything smaller than 5 will get these particular remesh settings. So you have the global scene rules that get applied on import to clean up the hierarchy and prepare everything and tessellate the CAD data. And then you have the mesh match rules, which then you can target specific mesh operations utilizing that same type of criteria. Really powerful system, and it really allows you to create these very scalable, batchable processes within InstaLOD. Now that we've covered an introduction to CAD processing, let's dive deeper into InstaLOD's mesh operations and their settings. InstaLOD 2024 introduces the new Delivery Optimization mesh operation, making it easy to optimize and compress 3D scenes for viewing on the web and in augmented reality and mixed reality. Let's take a look at how it works. Okay, so here you can see I have this wooden wheelbarrow mesh. You can see it's very high poly. It's about 1 million polygons, and there's a couple pieces here. We've got the rocks inside the wheelbarrow, and we also have the wheelbarrow itself. And you can see it's a very dense, highly tessellated model here, and it actually has some very high quality textures as well. You can see it has an 8K texture map for just the wheelbarrow itself, and then also we have a 4K texture map for the rocks inside. So let's say what I want to do is I want to optimize this model here to view in AR. Let's say I'm curating some models for a museum, and I want my visitors for the museum to be able to view these models at home with augmented reality. So what I can do is I can use the new Delivery Optimization mesh operation. And so I can go ahead and select it here in the top. And then what I can do is I can say, well, what is the target platform that I want to optimize this scene for? In this case, I can choose the web, or for my case, I'm going to choose augmented reality. And that's all I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and choose start here, and we're going to begin processing this mesh. So during this session, we're actually going to break down a lot of the steps that InstaLOD is doing automatically for us with the Delivery Optimization mesh operation, so that you'll be able to craft very powerful and specific workflows for your mesh processing pipelines. But what's nice about the new Delivery Optimization operation is that InstaLOD can do this automatically for you if you intend to view these assets on the web or with augmented reality. And so it's determining things like, where can it optimize the polygon count, and where can it combine objects? And you saw we had those really high resolution textures. Where can it start to merge some of these materials together to really compress and optimize the file size for this asset? So it's going ahead and using these advanced algorithms to determine how to use all the different tools in InstaLOD's arsenal to be able to optimize this asset for the target platform which we chose, which again is augmented reality. And you can see very quickly, we're almost done here, 100% finished. And there we go. We've now optimized this model from over 1 million polygons down to 78,000 polygons. And it looks fantastic, right? Let me just go ahead and orbit around here, change the light. And you can see it's done a few things here. First of all, if I click on it to view the wireframe, you can see we have significantly less polygons. It's reduced the polygon count, but also we can look at the UV viewer here. We have a 2K map now instead of an 8K map and a 4K map for my textures. And if I disable the UVs, we can see we have ambient occlusion, we've got the color, all the textures that we had from the original asset, all compressed and scaled down appropriately. You can even see that some of these textures are now 1K because it figures out, what can it do to compress this even further, depending on the certain maps that we need to view the asset. You can also see that we've combined those two, the rocks and the wheelbarrow together to get one asset here, which means we now have, if I go to my material editor tab and click on the asset, we have one material for this entire asset with one object, which means we've dropped the draw call count down to 1 as well. So that's fantastic. Also, I just want to go back to the textures and show you that we have that normal map that we've generated here. This is a tangent-based normal map, which is perfect for augmented reality. InstaLOD knows that we need that for the target platform. So now what I want to do is I'm going to show you one more thing when it comes to the delivery optimization mesh operation, which is the file size. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the file menu, and I'm going to go ahead and save or export this scene here. And I'm going to go ahead and call this Wooden Wheelbarrow Optimize. Go ahead and hit save. Give it a second to save here. And then I want to show you the difference between the original file and the optimized one. So you can see here that we have the original wheelbarrow FBX, which was 465 megabytes, almost 500 megabytes. And then we've compressed it and optimized it using delivery optimization down to just 7.6 megabytes. So it's really incredible what you can do automatically with just a click of a button using the delivery optimization mesh operation in InstaLOD. Now, before we move on from the delivery optimization mesh operation, I also wanted to show you an example of optimizing data for the web. So in this case, let me go ahead and drag in a file here. I'll show you another example, this time with CAD data. So I'll go ahead and bring that in. And so let's say for this example that I'm working for a company that is designing a new electric bike. And so we want to take the CAD data and all of the different design iterations and be able to quickly optimize and visualize it. And so to do that, we can share the data on the web, and members of the team can add feedback and be able to iterate very quickly on creating this product. So as you can see, I've just dropped in the bicycle here, and you can see it's a very large assembly here with a bunch of different links and parts of the chain. It's very unorganized in terms of how the CAD data is packaged up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import the CAD data directly into InstaLOD Studio and give it just a second to process here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some scene rules to be able to very quickly, get this back to where I had seen the previous design iteration with materials, and the hierarchy is a lot more organized and things like that. So you can see I have some scene rules set up from a previous design iteration that I was working on. So all I have to do is just go ahead and process those scene rules. And very quickly, you can see that we have our materials assigned, some nice basic materials here. We can also see that the hierarchy is cleaned up and it's a lot better. You can see things like the bell and the wheels are all grouped accordingly, which is very nice. So you can really see how scene rules are really impactful when it comes to making design iterations with CAD data. It's a very fast process. So now all we have to do is optimize this for the web. And so I can go to the mesh operation settings here, go to delivery optimization, and then for my target platform, I will choose the web. And that's all I need to do. I'll just go ahead and hit start. Now, because this is CAD data, InstaLOD is saying once you do this, you will no longer be able to retessellate the CAD data, and that's perfectly fine in this case. So I'll hit proceed. Now, when optimizing for augmented reality, which we did just a little bit earlier, it's important to pack the data in a very specific way, such as limiting the amount of objects and the inability to work with packed textures. But when optimizing for the web, InstaLOD packs in a way that maximizes the retention of the scene data, such as the hierarchy of submeshes that we can see here, the textures, and the material IDs. But what's important is that for us, we don't need to think about that. InstaLOD understands what all the requirements are for each platform and determines the best way to optimize each individual scene to get the best results. So as you can see here, the results look fantastic. You can see that we have our bike and we have all of our objects in our hierarchy still preserved. And, it's been optimized quite a bit too. I think the original was around 700,000 polygons, and we're down to 120,000. And we also have our materials that are still assigned as well, which is fantastic. So now that we have optimized the asset for the web, let's take a look at how we can view this on the web and deliver this on the web using something called Abstract Polyverse. Now, Abstract Polyverse is another solution from the creators of InstaLOD, which allows you to easily organize, process, collaborate, and share your 3D assets with what are called Polyverse asset libraries. And with the introduction of InstaLOD 2024, we have a fantastic integration between InstaLOD and Abstract Polyverse, which make it really easy to be able to share the assets that you create and optimize in InstaLOD Studio directly to an asset library with Abstract Polyverse. And we can do that by clicking on this Share to Polyverse button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And as you can see, I have all of my asset libraries here, and I'm going to pick the bike library. And so you can see InstaLOD generates this quick thumbnail turntable preview, which is really nice. And so I can go ahead and give this a name. I think that's fine. I can give it a category and description and tags and all the metadata that I need to be able to organize my assets, even the visibility about who can access this asset. It's really fantastic. But really all I'm going to do now is go ahead and upload the asset. And very quickly, you can see that InstaLOD is uploading the asset to Polyverse, and it gives me this link. And now I can share this link with my clients, with my team, and they'll immediately be able to visualize and see the asset in a web browser. So let's go ahead and view this asset on the web. I'll go ahead and click the link. And now instantly we're presented with our asset in Abstract Polyverse in this beautiful 3D viewer. So this is what Abstract Polyverse looks like when you're viewing a 3D asset from one of your libraries. And so as you can see, I can now view and interact with this bike in incredible detail here. And all it took was just a single button to upload it to the web. And this is fantastic. So let me go ahead and customize the viewport a little bit. Let's go ahead and add a floor here. I'm also going to add a background, and I'll just blur it a little bit and maybe adjust the exposure. So you can see we can make some really nice customizations to the viewport to be able to present our assets. And so now if I want to save this, all I have to do is go ahead and hit the edit button and just hit save. You can see I don't have to refresh the page or everything. All of the changes were saved here, and I can go and update the thumbnails as well if I want to. And there we go. So this is looking really, really great. Let me go ahead and leave that. And so now I can share this link with my colleagues and with my team, and now we can provide feedback with some comments. They can add thumbs up or thumbs down. They can even add annotations in the viewport. So it's a really powerful way to be able to share and collaborate on assets. Now here's something that's really cool. Polyverse is doing something really powerful behind the scenes. So for every 3D asset that we upload to an asset library in Polyverse, Polyverse is actually creating 3 levels of detail automatically on the fly for us. And you can see that here. You can see we have this gear with a little HD. And if I click on that, you can see that we can view our original high quality mesh, the high quality mesh that has been optimized using InstaLOD technology, and even a low quality mesh that's been optimized just a bit further. And if I click on that, you can see what the low quality mesh looks like. It looks absolutely incredible. You can see that even all the small little parts of the wheel have been preserved, and the chain and the bike and everything. And so I didn't have to think about anything at all. Polyverse is using technology from InstaLOD to be able to create 3 different levels of detail automatically for every 3D asset that we're uploading, including CAD data. So it's very, very powerful to be able to use Polyverse this way. And now there's one more thing that I want to show you with Abstract Polyverse before we go and look at some other mesh operations for InstaLOD. And that is, what if I want to very quickly be able to share and visualize CAD data, and I don't need to necessarily use InstaLOD Studio to pre-process it or assign it in materials, for example. Well, I want to show you how you can do that with Abstract Polyverse. So I'm going to go to the bike library that I have here, and you can see we have our bike here, and we have a material as well. What if I told you I can just upload CAD data directly to Polyverse, and it will automatically do all the processing for us and the tessellation to be able to view it on the web? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'll go ahead and choose to upload another asset, and I'll choose to upload a mesh. And notice that we have a lot of CAD file formats here that we can then just drop in directly into this panel in our web browser. So I'm going to go ahead and find another file here and drag this in. So this is another CAD file. And so this is this basket. So let's say that the designers that are working on the bike have come up with a new accessory for the bike, which is a basket that we can place on the front. So I want to be able to share this with the rest of the team and start to visualize it. So let's go ahead and upload it. Again, Polyverse very quickly is going to upload the asset, and then it's going to start doing all of its processing. So that's everything from tessellating the CAD data into polygons, also creating those 3 levels of detail that we talked about automatically as well. And those 3 levels of detail make it easy for anyone who's using any kind of platform. So whether it's a low-powered, maybe mobile phone, for example, or a tablet, they'll be able to view this asset in Polyverse by using that more crunched down level of detail, or if they're using a more high powered machine like the one I'm using here, they can view the asset in higher quality, and Polyverse will automatically recommend which level of detail to view when you visit the page. So I'm going to let this process here, and I'm going to go ahead and quickly refresh. And there we go, we can now see our asset in Polyverse. This is taken from CAD data directly into Polyverse and then tessellated into polygons and optimized for us. And now I can start to visualize this asset in 3D right away. So this is super, super powerful. So you can also see that we have those different levels of detail that were created for us automatically as well. We've got some thumbnails that have been created for us. And so I'll go ahead and save this, but what I want to do is actually start to visualize this with the proper materials. We didn't use InstaLOD Studio to pre-process this data to add materials for us. So we can actually apply materials in Polyverse right here in the browser, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and add an affiliate here. And I've got that blue material that's part of that the bike library that we're using. So I'll go ahead and click this, and I'll set the affiliate type to mesh material, and I'll tell it to replace all of the materials. I could have it replace a specific material section, but in this case there's only one, so I'll go ahead and choose to replace all of them. And I'll give it a description. I'll call this blue paint and choose to register the affiliate, and that's all I need to do. We're good to go. So now if I go ahead and save this, and I'll just go back to my regular view mode. Now what I can do is go down here to my material variants and choose to apply the material. And right away, I can now visualize this material, visualize this asset with the proper material applied. It's really that easy. So now what we can do is we can upload different accessories, we can upload different versions of the bicycle, and we can use the automatic tessellation and optimization features that are based with that use InstaLOD's technology right within Polyverse to be able to quickly organize and collaborate and share our 3D assets. So as you can see, the powerful technology with the delivery optimization operation in InstaLOD and also the InstaLOD technology in Abstract Polyverse make it extremely easy to be able to view our assets on the web. Next, let's take a look at InstaLOD's Polygon Optimizer. The Polygon Optimizer takes the incoming mesh and intelligently removes vertices to reduce the polygon count. It does this in a way that preserves many of the mesh's features, such as the UVs, the shading, the silhouette, and skinning for rigs and animations. And we can tell InstaLOD which attributes of the mesh are more important than others. Let's take a closer look at the Polygon Optimizer. So here you can see I've imported this troll character. Now this troll has 127,000 polygons. It also has multiple submeshes. You can see we have the cloth, the eyes, different parts of the mouth, and the body, so different submeshes. We also have 3 different materials assigned as well. Now with InstaLOD, it's very easy to optimize this mesh, but for other optimizers, it might be a lot more difficult. Let me show you why. You can see here along the back of this troll, let me go ahead and add a material here, so it's easier to see. You can see along the back we have some non-manifold geometry. Now what most optimizers would do in this case would probably give you an error if they tried to optimize this mesh. Or even if you are able to find an optimizer that could process this model, it might do something worse, which is rip a hole in the back of this troll. So In this case with InstaLOD, you don't have to worry about that at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I might be able to optimize this troll, but I want to show you how I can generate a chain of LODs very easily here in InstaLOD Studio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the optimizer here. I have this set to optimize as my mesh operation, and I'm going to add a few mesh operations in this panel here. First off, I'm going to rename this one LOD0. And LOD0 is the highest quality that we have here. I don't want to do anything to this version of the mesh. I'm just going to set the percentage triangles to 100%, so we're doing no reduction, and we're going to keep it as is. Next, I'm going to add another entry here, LOD1, and I'm going to keep it at the default setting here of reducing this troll to a 50% reduction in triangles. Then I'm going to add another entry, LOD2, and I'm going to set this in half, and I'm going to set it to 25%. Then I'm going to add another entry and cut that in half yet again with 12.5%. And that's all I need to do to create an LOD chain here in InstaLOD. You'll see if I go ahead and hit start, you can see very quickly we're going to now process and optimize this mesh to generate all those LODs very, very quickly. And the reason why this happens so quickly is because InstaLOD is running asynchronously across all the CPU cores on my machine. And so effectively it takes the same amount of time to generate 4 LODs as it does to create 1. So what I can do here is I can hover over these tabs across the top, and you can see we're getting a real-time preview of each of these LODs. You'll notice that the polygon count is decreasing significantly, but the mesh is visually not changing that much at all. And that has a lot to do with something that we'll talk about here, which is the feature importances here. InstaLOD is taking a lot of the different factors of the mesh, like the textures, the shading, and the skinning, if this was rigged, for example, into account. It's able to maintain a lot of the visual quality of this mesh. And that includes the UVs. I'll go ahead and show you the wireframe real quickly on the troll here. If I go ahead and hover over these, you can see that we are heavily reducing the amount of polygons on this troll. But even on LOD3 here, you can see it's looking great. Now also you'll notice the back of the troll as well. Even on LOD3, we're still maintaining the non-manifold geometry here on the back, and we're not ripping a hole out of the troll. Now I'll go ahead and show you the UVs of this troll as well here. And you can see as I go through each of these LODs, the only thing that's changing here is the amount of polygons, but we're not changing the UVs of this troll at all. Very, very powerful. So if I wanted to, I could save this profile out as LOD.json or something like that, and I can now batch process this across all of my assets. But how do I know if I could optimize this troll even further? We're using exact percentages here to reduce the amount of polygons, but maybe I could reduce this model by 30 more percent. How do I know if I can do that? Well, I can utilize another feature in InstaLOD's Polygon Optimizer, which I'll show you in just a second. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new profile, and I'll show you a different mesh here. So I'm gonna use Optimize as the profile, and I'm going to bring in a mesh that's quite difficult to optimize, and I'll show you why here. So here you can see we have this car hood, and the reason why it's so difficult to optimize is because not only is it a hard surface object, but it also has these organic curves, and it also has this power dome where we have these pinching points here as well, which require a lot of edges to maintain. So it's kind of difficult to see what's going on here. So again, I'm going to change the materials. I'm going to set up the metalness here and lower the roughness a little bit. And so now you can see this is quite a difficult mesh to optimize, but we're going to use the optimizer to do so. So what I want to do here, well, I will say that even with a complex mesh like this, we're going to be able to optimize this mesh to 50% of its triangle count right away with no issues at all. But first I want to highlight something about this mesh. You can see with our UVs here, they're not great. They're not horrible, but you can see we have some overlapping shells, and these shells aren't taking up as much space of the 0 to 1 space as they could. Now, the reason why it's important to take these things into account is because InstaLOD is taking these things into account as well. Remember, we have these features importances, and the texture importance is saying, well, I want to maintain these UVs as best as I can. Well, you remember we had the CAD demo, we had that rim, and we had really bad UVs from that CAD data. Well, if it's trying to optimize and maintain those UVs, you might not get as good of a result if InstaLOD is still trying to maintain those shells in that bad state. So what we can do is we can change the texture importance to off, in which case it's going to optimize the mesh as much as it can while looking at it from a visual standpoint. It will still look absolutely perfect and not worry about those UVs if they aren't in a great layout. So as I said, we're very quickly going to be able to take this from 70,000 polygons down to 35,000 polygons very easily, and you'll notice the shading is looking absolutely perfect. And the shading is so important on the automotive models because in the automotive sector, the shading needs to be absolutely pristine. It's very important. And there's the wireframe. But I did mention, we've used the exact percentage with the percentage triangles before. How do I know if I can optimize this further? Well, that's where we can use the maximum deviation. And if you recall, during the CAD part of this session, we used the maximum deviation as a quality threshold when tessellating the CAD NURBS data into polygons. Well, we have the same exact feature here in the optimizer as well, a quality threshold, which we can say, let's optimize this asset as much as we possibly can until we hit a quality threshold that we specify. In this case, it'll be the same number, 0.01, again, a great threshold number to work with if you're using maximum deviation at the beginning. And then I'll go ahead and hit start and optimize the unmodified version of this mesh. And you see, we are actually able to optimize this even further. We're now down to 19,000 polygons with still beautiful shading here. And there's the wireframe of that. Now, if I wanted to create another LOD of this asset, for example, and I want to optimize it further, all I have to do is increase the deviation amount. So 0.05, for example, I'll go ahead and run this, and you'll be able to see that we can actually do even more of a reduction here, a massive 90% reduction, but still have a beautiful result here. It's incredibly powerful. And now this level of optimization is something that you really just can't do manually. You can't get this quality manually. And what we're doing is there's no trickery here. We're not making any normal maps, but we are placing the vertex normals of this mesh in the perfect spot to get this beautiful shading here on this mesh. Now this mesh is really great, but it's not perfect yet because if I zoom in here, you'll see that we have these sensor holes and we do have some shading errors. And this is a great example to show you how you can apply some manual control to the optimization process if you need it. In this case, what we're going to do, I'm going to go back to the unmodified version here. And I'm going to show you our optimizer weights and vertex painting mode here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the mesh and go into the vertex painting mode, and I'll show you how we can tell InstaLOD where we want to optimize and where we do not want to optimize on this asset. So we can do that with two different colors. We can use the blue color here. Blue color I think of as freeze or pin, and so I'm just going to paint blue around this sensor hole. I'm going to be a little bit generous here and just say don't optimize this area. And now on the other side, I'm going to use the red color, and the red is saying heavily optimize this part of the asset. And I'm actually going to decrease the radius of my brush here because, as you'll see in a second, red can be quite destructive. So there we go. So again, we have blue here on the left, which means do not optimize, and we have the red over here, which means yes, do optimize as much as you can. And I'll go ahead and say commit and finish. So we have those optimizer weights applied, but we just need to tell InstaLOD to use those weights. So I'm going to go down to optimizer weights and choose color set index. And so now I'll just use the same settings that I had from before and hit start. And we're going to get that massive reduction here, as you can see, with beautiful quality. But if I go ahead and zoom in here, we have a perfectly round sensor hole. And what's really incredible here is not just that we could preserve it, but also the transition between the optimized section and the unoptimized section looks fantastic. Again, something that you can't really do manually. But what I think is even more impressive is on the other side here, which you'll see that the hole is completely gone, and yet we have nice, smooth normals and a transition between the optimized section. Between with the optimized section, removing that hole. So we can remove visual holes this way if we wanted to. Really, really powerful. So you see that we have this global control with the maximum deviation of the level of quality that we want. But if we want to get that, precise manual control, we can certainly do so with the optimizer weights. So now we've taken a look at how we could dial in specifically what type of reduction we would like to do with the optimizer. For example, the percentage triangles and also the maximum deviation. But sometimes we just like to have a much simpler way of optimizing our assets. And in which case, we can do so very much so with a new feature in InstaLOD 2023 called Automatic Quality. And so what the automatic quality dropdown lets us do is tell InstaLOD what is the level of quality that we'd like as a result of this optimization, and don't worry about anything else. Just optimize it, and I don't just set any other settings. So I'm going to show you, I'll make a new profile here, just how powerful this automatic quality setting is. I'm going to bring in a prop here, a communicator. Go ahead and import that here. And you can see this is a hard surface prop. It's got many different sub meshes. It also has a few materials as well. And so I could go ahead and dial in the triangle percentage or use the maximum deviation, but in this case, I just quickly want to get this asset ready for a real-time application, real-time environment. And so all I need to do is go to the automatic quality setting and set this to normal. And I'll hit start. We're at 156,000 polygons, and we could optimize this down to 20,000 polygons. I had no idea that this was the level of number of polygons I could reduce this down to, but InstaLOD was able to determine it based on the level of quality that I specified here using one drop-down menu. And I'll go ahead and click this here, and we can look at the wireframe. And it's looking pristine. And here's what's really cool about automatic quality. Let me bring in another asset here. Automatic quality, just like the maximum deviation, is another one of those scalable parameters. So it's going to determine how much optimization it needs to apply based on the characteristics of the mesh that it is optimizing and the level of quality that we specified. So again, I'll keep the settings exactly the same, and I'll go ahead and optimize this character from 126,000 down to 44,000. And you can see this is another complex mesh. We've got hair, we've got cloth, things like that. But it was able to determine how much it was able to reduce this by, again, based on the quality setting. And so if I want to reduce this even further, I can just lower the quality that I want. So I'll set it to low, hit start and choose the unmodified mesh. And now we're down to 20,000 polygons. And you can see with this type of level of detail, you wouldn't see this mesh nearly this close, but I can certainly zoom in. You can see that we're getting a beautiful reduction. And just to show you one more time, let me go ahead and bring in another character here. There we go. And you see this is a completely different shape and form with lots of round surfaces and organic shapes, 36,000 polygons. I'm not going to change a single setting here. I'm just going to hit start. And we're down to 11,000 polygons. So you can see how the automatic quality setting is really powerful. And if you wanted to, you can create an LOD chain just by changing the quality for each LOD. It makes it really easy to make this a batchable process because, again, it's a scalable parameter. So you can see there's many different ways to control the Polygon Optimizer here. And we also have precise control with our vertex painting as well. So now I'd like to talk about another one of our mesh operations here, which is the remesher. InstaLOD's remesher combines three main operations into one. By creating a brand new mesh from scratch, effectively doing the automatic read topology of the asset, unwrapping the UVs of this new mesh, and baking the information from the original onto the newly generated mesh, including the creation of any additional mesh maps needed for texturing. This also reduces draw calls by combining meshes into one, and if desired, merging materials by creating a texture atlas. Now, in essence, the remesher can create a real-time ready asset with the click of a button. Let's go ahead and dive into the remesher. So here you can see I've brought back the troll, and the reason why I did that is because he has a lot of different parts and aspects that make him useful to show off the many different features of the remesher. First of all, just to recap, we have a few different parts here. We've got the cloth, we've got the different eyes and the body and things like that. We also have that broken geometry on the back as well, and we have a few different materials too. So you can see we have 3 different materials assigned to the different parts of this troll. So what I'm going to do is you see I have the remesher here selected as my mesh operation. I'm not going to touch any settings. I'm just going to use the default settings, and I'm going to hit start. And so again, it's going to reconstruct the mesh from scratch and create brand new UVs from that reconstruction, and it's going to bake the high poly information onto this low poly, and it's going to do it very, very quickly. And you can see we're already done here. We now have 14,500 polygons for this mesh, and it's looking absolutely pristine. And it's done a few things as well inherently because it is a remesh. First off, you can see that it has modeled over the different parts here. You can see if I zoom in, you can see that the cloth and the body are now connected as it's now one continuous mesh here. You can also see that it has modeled over the back, and it's fixed the non-manifold geometry from this troll, which is really, really nice. You can also notice as well that we have one draw call here. So we've combined all the objects together. We've also created one single material as well. So if you go over here, we can see, click on the filter, you can see that this is now referencing one material. So we've lowered down the draw call count. And let's go ahead and take a look at these textures and UVs. This is the new UV layout that's been generated for us for this new mesh. And you can see we have these really nice big shells that take up the 0 to 1 space. You'll also notice that if I go ahead and disable the UVs, we have this normal map as well, and we've modeled in all of the extra detail into the normal map. So I want to talk a little bit about this normal map because InstaLOD's doing something really powerful behind the scenes here. If I go into the texture output settings, you can see that I didn't change any settings here. We're baking a 2K texture map. Now, the reason why we're able to get such amazing detail here is because we also have super sampling enabled in the remesher. In fact, all of our baking operations from all of our mesh operations that bake textures have super sampling. So just to review, what it does is it takes the resolution of the texture that we define here. We want a 2K map, but it multiplies it by a factor. So again, times 2, we're actually creating a 4K texture bake, and then we're sampling it down into that 2K texture size, but we're retaining a lot of that information from that high quality 4K bake. You can also see that we were baking some custom textures and a normal map here. If I wanted to, I could also create additional textures like an ambient occlusion map or thickness or curvature, all really useful for bringing this model into a texturing application if I wanted to. Let's like zone in on the normal map here for a second, because if we go back to the unmodified mesh, you'll see here, if I click on the troll, all of this extra detail here was in the normal map. All of the scars and the veins and things like that, they weren't modeled out in the geometry, but instead they were in a normal map, and they were in a tangent space normal map, which means this normal map only works for this particular mesh. So the normal map is only showing in relation to the vertices of this mesh, meaning we can't transfer that normal map onto the new mesh that we're creating. But instead, what InstaLOD was able to do was it was able to transfer the information from that tangent space normal map and create a brand new normal map that corresponds to this new geometry, which really is some next level baking. And from our perspective, from the user perspective, we didn't have to think about this at all. It was automatically going to bake all that information and transfer the information, and it gave us a pristine result where we see virtually no loss in quality here. So really, really powerful next level baking technology here in InstaLOD. So you can see that it was really easy to create a real-time ready asset here just by hitting go and using the remesher. But now I want to talk about scan data. Let's go ahead and bring in a scan here. I'll just go and find one. And the reason why I want to talk about scan data is because it inherently has a lot of problems. And this particular example demonstrates the problems that we get with scan data quite clearly. So I'll go ahead and make a new profile and use the remesher again. So the first problem is the poly count. You can see that this mesh, it appears quite dense, and that's because it is. It's actually just a little over 1 million polygons, which for a scan is actually quite tame. But you can see we do have 1 million polygons here, so it's really dense. We really need to lower the amount of polygons to make this a real-time ready asset if we wanted to. And it's worth mentioning that with InstaLOD, the software is not the bottleneck here. You can very easily process hundreds and hundreds of millions of polygons with InstaLOD. But the bottleneck, as I mentioned, it's not the software, it's how much RAM you have, it's the hardware. So if you increase the amount of RAM you have, you can also increase the amount of polygons that you can process. So we need to fix the polygon count here. Now let's talk about some other issues. One of them being that we have this soil or this dirt on the ground, and I don't want that in my visualization, but also we have a large hole at the bottom as well. So inherently what remeshers will do is they will see this hole and they'll actually model under the other side of the mesh, resulting in back faces, and that will give you twice as many polygons as you want. So luckily with InstaLOD and the remesher, we don't have to worry about this. There's a few ways to fix this issue. One of them is just by clicking the Ignore Back Faces button, and it's going to determine where the mesh boundaries are, and it's not going to model over the other side. So that's very easy to do, and I'm also going to show you another way in which we can fix that on this mesh as well. So we've got the hole, we have to worry about back faces. Let's also take a look at the UVs. Now this mesh has an 8K texture on it. So that's quite a massive texture, but also look at the UVs here. You can see we have hundreds of shells and they're spaced very inefficiently. The UV layout for this model is very inefficient, and we can definitely make this better with the remesher. The last thing that I want to tackle here happens to do with the method in which this model was captured. In this case, this was captured using photogrammetry, meaning you take a bunch of photos around the mesh and it's going to reconstruct it, and it's going to give you lots and lots of detail. It's going to give you all of the detail from the photos used to reconstruct this mesh, and it's going to put it on the model. Unfortunately, what that means is you get all the detail that you don't want as well, including the time of day and the lighting information. So you can see here on this mesh, we have some shadows in the crevices. And if I move the light here, we still get those shadows in the same place. So to represent this model in a different environment, the shadows aren't going to make sense. We need to remove those highlights and shadows with delighting, and we can do so here with the remesher as well. So let's go ahead and tackle each of these issues one by one. Now, inherently, the poly count is going to reduce by using the remesher with the new mesh. It's going to retopologize. But let's talk about this bottom section here. How can I remove it? Well, I'm going to create a clipping plane. So if I click that and just drag this here, anything underneath this plane is going to be removed, and it's going to cap off the object and seal it so that we don't model back faces as well. So it does both of those operations with one clipping plane. Next up, what I want to do is, I think we can go ahead and look at the UVs are fine. We're just going to use an unwrap strategy of auto. If I go ahead and take a look at the textures, I think what I want to do is continue with a 2K texture map. And again, that's because we have super sampling as well, and we're going to generate a more efficient UV layout as a result. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to show off the delighting features here. But to do that, I'm going to create a duplicate mesh operation. And the only thing I'm going to change here is turn on delighting here in my texture settings. And that's all I'm going to do. So I'll go ahead and hit start. We're running the remesher with the default settings, and we'll talk about some of those settings a little bit further on after this process. But we're actually running this process twice, which is pretty amazing. We're doing the reconstruction, the UV unwrap, the baking, and then we're doing the delighting. We're doing that twice here. So you can see we're already finished. Let's go ahead and look at that result. I'm going to hide the clipping plane. So from 1 million polygons, you can see we're now down to 16,500. And look at this beautiful reconstruction that we have here. And I'll show you the wireframe, and you can see what it's done. It's modeled over that detail, and it's put the rest of that detail into the model's normal map. And I'll show you the normal map here. You can actually see this is the result of the UVs that we're creating, much more space efficient. We're only using a 2K texture, and we're still retaining that detail. And that detail, again, I can show you the normal map as well. all that extra detail has been added here. So you can see at the bottom, the bottom has been removed here. We don't have that extra soil. And also you can still see that we don't have any back faces, which is amazing. And now let's go ahead and take a look at that baked in lighting. So you can see in this version, we didn't do any delighting, so we still have those shadows. But now if I hover over this tab to show you the other version, here you can see the removed highlights and shadows with that automatic delighting. Super, super powerful. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can dial in some of these settings, because you saw I just used pretty much the default settings here within the remesher. Now there are two settings that I want to talk about. The first is the fuzzy face count target, and the second is the surface construction resolution. So for the face count, we didn't specify how many polygons we wanted as a result. And that's because the remesher is designed to be an extremely scalable mesh operation. So what the fuzzy face count target says is give InstaLOD a general idea of how many polygons you would like as a result. Because if you're batch processing a large folder, you might have a small prop like a stapler, and then you might have a huge scanned environment, like some sort of archaeological dig that you'd like to digitally preserve, for example. And you don't really know how many polygons you're going to need for either of those. And so what's really nice is InstaLOD is able to determine how many polygons it needs based on the direction that you give it here. So you can see I have it set to normal, and normal is really good for a real-time asset, for example. We could also set it to something like low, and low would be great for AR, VR, and maybe some web-based, 3D experiences. And if you crank it down all the way to lowest, it's going to crunch all those polygons down, and it's really great for LODs that are quite far off in the distance and far away from the camera. But if you wanted to, you could also change it to high or highest, and you could have InstaLOD generate assets for offline renders as well. Now, the other feature, the other setting that I wanted to talk about was that surface construction resolution. And what this determines is how much is InstaLOD going to model out in the constructed read topology, and how much is it going to put into the normal map. So if I increase this resolution to something like high, it might model out more parts of the beard, more parts of the face, for example, instead of put that all into the normal map. So you have that control if you'd like. Actually, I do want to mention one more feature, and that is called distinct construction. So inherently, what the remesher does is it combines all the objects together into one. But if you want to maintain the different submeshes that you're working with here, you can enable distinct construction, and it will remesh all of the different submeshes independently to keep those separate in case you have things like animations that you'd like to preserve. So you saw here with just a few settings, we managed to remove the extra dirt, we prevented the back face creation, we significantly lowered the polygon count, and we have more efficient UVs, and we were able to do delighting, again, all with one step here with the remesher. But I want to talk about a couple other operations that we can perform that use our remeshing technology. So I'm going to make a new profile here. And the remeshing options that I want to show you are the isotropic remesher and the quad remesher. And let's start off with the quad remesher. So I'm going to bring in a different mesh here. And I'll bring in a different statue here. So you can see that this mesh is triangulated here. We have pretty highly triangulated mesh, and I would like to convert this now into quads. And that's exactly what the quad remesher is going to do for us. It's going to reconstruct the mesh, but instead of using triangles, it's going to create a quad pure topology on this mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust what's called the target edge size, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I'll just hit start. And so it's going to again recreate this mesh, and the way it's able to do so is based on these two settings here, the edge mode and the target edge size. And so the edge mode is another scalable parameter. It's going to determine how do we want to determine the length of each of the edges for these quads. How big are these quads going to be? And by default, it's set to automatic, meaning that it's going to use the scale and complexity of the scene to determine how large those quads need to be. And so you can see very quickly, that's exactly what it's done. We have this beautiful representation of this object, but now entirely made from quads. Now, the second part of that automatic calculation is the target edge size. So it determined the size of the edges that we needed, but then I could just scale them up or scale them down based on this value here. So I decided to make them just a little bit bigger so you can see this in the demonstration. So that's quad remesh, but let's talk about isotropic remesh as well. I'll make a new profile here, choose isotropic remesh, and I'll make a new scene and bring in a different mesh. So here you can see we have this duffel bag. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to set up this mesh so that I can do a soft body simulation and run some really technical animations on it so that the bag responds naturally like it would in the real world. And so in order to do that, we need to have really good topology for good simulations. So what isotropic remesh does is it's going to reconstruct the mesh again, just like the other remeshers, but in this case, it's going to ensure that all the edges have the same length, which makes it easier for these type of complex calculations to be made across this mesh. So you can also see that it has an edge mode, and I can have it set to automatic by default. So again, it's another scalable parameter here. We also have a target edge size, but in this case, I'm going to change what's called the geometric feature angle in degrees. I'm just going to set that to 20 and hit start. And what that does is it says, well, if there's a feature angle on this mesh and it's, the angle is larger than this threshold that we give it, well, it's going to maintain that angle, and it's going to, try to get as many of these edges to be consistent in length as much as it can, while also maintaining a certain level of quality and representation that we specify. So you can see here, the mesh is a brilliant reconstruction here. It looks exactly the same. But now if I look at the topology, you can see that we have this consistent edge length across the mesh here. And this is really helpful for those type of soft body simulations and animations that I talked about. So you can see that we have many different ways to remesh assets here in InstaLOD. We saw that we have the remesher, which lets you create real-time ready assets with a single click of a button. We also have quad remesh, which lets you reconstruct the mesh with quad pure topology. And we have isotropic remesh, which is really great for these soft body calculations, and we can restructure the mesh to have this consistent edge length across the asset itself. So next up, what I want to do is I want to move on to our next mesh operation, which is imposterization. Imposters are a nice way to represent objects using an extremely low amount of polygons. We can generate new geometry that represents the model without it being what it seems. Let's take a look. So here we have this car chassis, and what I'd like to do is show you the first type of imposter today, which is the billboard type imposter. So I want to be able to represent this object from a distance, but still have it appear like it's in the environment, but significantly lower the poly count. So I have billboard selected here. You can see I have imposterized selected as my mesh operation, and I want to create a billboard on the YZ axis. So we have the YZ axis here. I'll remove the XY axis. And so for the textures, I'm going to set this down to 1K because this is going to be seen from a distance. We don't need that much resolution. I'll turn super sampling off. Now we have roughness and metalness here. So I'll have roughness and metalness included in the bake. And I'll very quickly go ahead and hit start. And now you can see we've generated this imposter here. You can see from a distance, it's reacting to the light like it should. But if I go ahead and zoom in here, you can actually see that this is a single plane here representing this object. So billboard imposters are extremely powerful. We can now represent this object very accurately from a distance. But let's go ahead and take a look at a different type of imposter. I'll go ahead and find it here. Now the imposter that I want to show you next is really useful for foliage. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a tree here. You can see we have this tree. I'll go ahead and change the imposter type. The imposter that we're going to use to optimize game foliage is this hybrid billboard cloud imposter type. And so foliage is quite notorious to optimize, especially like this, because in games and in real-time applications, all this tree is made up of is a bunch of planes. And you can see here, for example, we have just a set of planes with this branch leaf texture applied. And if we start removing these vertices, we're going to start thinning out this tree. So what we could do is we can use the hybrid billboard cloud imposter to optimize the poly count while still retaining the parallax of this tree. So I'm going to reduce the polygon count down all the way to 400 polygons, and I'm going to set my textures back to 2K. I still don't need any super sampling, but I'm going to remove the roughness and the metalness channels because we don't need it. I'll go ahead and hit start. And so what the hybrid billboard cloud is doing is it's creating a volume around this object here, and we're creating our own planes to create that parallax. And so as you can see here, we now have parallax with this tree, but we've optimized it down all the way to just under 400 polygons, and it still responds to the light. So extremely powerful, the hybrid billboard cloud imposter type. Now we do have a bunch of other imposters to choose from, but the last one I want to show you today is the custom geometry imposter. So I'll go ahead and bring in my next model. Now, the problem area with this model has to do with this grille in the front. So you can see it's quite a complex part of the car. If I go ahead and zoom in here, you can see we have a bunch of edges, and you might notice how removing edges from this model as well might be quite difficult because, well, I'll go ahead and show you. It's 22,000 polygons, but let me just quickly try and reduce this down to 10% of what it is, and I'll go ahead and hit start. And you'll see that, well, we really do need all of those edges. The result here is quite horrible. So this is definitely not the way to optimize this kind of piece. So what I'm going to do is go back to the unmodified version, and I'll show you how we can significantly lower the poly count of this grille using a different type of imposter, which is the custom geometry imposter. So we have custom geometry here. What I've done is I've quickly modeled out this plane here, and you'll notice that it has some curvature because, you know, the grille has some curvature as well. Now we could use a billboard imposter, but in this case I want to retain the visual curvature of this piece of this grille, and I can do so by very quickly modeling out my own little plane with some curvature that matches that grille. And so that's what's happened here. Now I want to be able to bake out this information of this grille onto the surface of this plane, and in order to tell InstaLOD what's the imposter, what are we going to transfer this detail onto, we can use a mesh suffix underscore imposter, and that's what I've done here. I've just called it grille underscore imposter, and that's what this piece is. Now what I'm also going to do, so I'll select that grille and I'll select that custom piece of geometry. What I can do is use this filter here on the left. And so this filter not only visually filters the objects that we have selected in the viewport, but it also tells InstaLOD to only apply this mesh operation to these selected objects. And just to compare here, we have a filter on the left that's for the viewport, but we also have a filter in the material editor that filters out what materials are assigned to the selected objects. So there's two separate filters there. But I'm going to go ahead and use the filter here on the left and go ahead and hit start and proceed. And we're going to fire off rays from the vertex normals of this plane to bake the information of this grille onto that plane. And there you go. You can see I've already done it, but I'm just going to move this grille a little bit further forward because I had to put the grille behind the other part here. So there you go. And now you can see we've retained all of the detail of that grille, and it responds to the lighting, and it looks absolutely stunning. So what's really impressive here is that this plane is now it's only 200 polygons and it looks pristine. Before, when we optimized it down to 2,000 polygons, it looked really, really bad. So custom geometry imposters are really great when it comes to trying to optimize really complex information like this grille. So you can see we have a couple different imposters to choose from here. A lot of really useful options, such as the billboard, which, you know, is really great for representing objects from far away. And then we have the hybrid billboard cloud for foliage, and you see we have things like the custom geometry imposter to do stuff like this. So imposterization in InstaLOD is extremely powerful. Now next, I'd like to go back to material merging. Material merging allows us to combine multiple materials into one set of textures. Now, we did briefly look at it earlier with the CAD rim. However, I'd like to show you just how powerful material merging is with a more complex scene. So here you can see we have this city scene, and so there's a lot going on here. We have over 90 different objects. We've got over 40 different materials. If I go ahead and click on some of these objects, you can see they each have different UV layouts. We actually have some tiling UVs here. We've got some we've got this sofas. We've got park benches, walls, all of this, and what I would really like to do is I would like to take all of the materials here in this scene, and I would like to combine them all together into one set of textures. And let's just say, for example, that in terms of polygons and optimization, this scene is good to go. But the main issue that we have here with this scene is the draw call count. We have lots of draw calls, which make this quite an intensive scene to render real time. So I want to combine all these different objects and materials together. And I can do that here in InstaLOD to optimize this scene quite heavily. So in order to combine all of these materials together, I'm going to use that material merge operation that we used earlier, and I'm going to set up some settings here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the gutter size in pixels to 15. This is just going to make it so that the shells have more space around them, and it's going to prevent mip-map bleeding. Now, the second thing I'm going to do is quite specific to this case. You can see we have this brick wall texture, and so if I were to rotate the shells of this and the textures of this brick texture, let's say 30 degrees, for example, what's going to happen is that the brick texture isn't going to line up with the pixel grid, meaning we might end up with some pixel stepping, and that doesn't look very, very good. So what we can do is we can limit how InstaLOD's going to rotate and pack these shells with this shell rotation feature. I'm going to set it to only allow 90-degree rotations. So now that we've set that up, let's go ahead and take a look at the texture settings. And here's where things start to really get interesting, because with a scene this size, you might expect that in order to pack all these textures onto a single tile, we might need a resolution of 4K or 8K to get a great visual fidelity. However, that's not the case. With InstaLOD, I'm going to show you how we can do a material merge with only a 2K texture. And there's a couple reasons why we can do this, but I'm going to go ahead and start this off, and then I'll explain why. So one of those reasons is super sampling. As I mentioned before, we can multiply the resolution that we want by a factor and then sample it down into our texture size. You can see already we've done that here. And here you go. You can see that we actually have the result, and it looks absolutely stunning. This entire scene is on a single 2K texture. It's extremely impressive and a very powerful thing that you can do. If I go ahead and click on one of these objects, we can see here's what the texture tile looks like. And here's what's really interesting. If I go ahead and click on these different pieces, you'll notice that the highlighted shells aren't changing and the positions aren't moving. And so in this scene, all these buildings and different pieces, they aren't instances, but they're actually duplicate objects. And so what InstaLOD could do is detect where these duplicates are, and we can stack these duplicate shells on top of one another. And therefore, this will save us a lot of resolution, a lot of space in our tile here, and therefore we can increase the size of all the other tiles to get a much higher resolution and really get all those objects all into a single tile like this with such a high visual fidelity. And we can do that because we have this stack duplicate shells option on by default here. So extremely powerful. We're able to take an entire scene like this and put it all into a single material here, but you can still see that we still have 98 draw calls, and that's because we have 98 objects calling on that single texture. So what I can do is, again, use the mesh toolkit. I'll go ahead and combine the meshes together, hit start, and use the processed scene that we're using. And so now we have a single object here with a single material, and now just one draw call for this entire scene, which is really, really impressive. So material merging, an excellent feature to combine materials to create that texture atlas and heavily reduce draw calls. The last mesh operation I'd like to demonstrate today is occlusion culling, which allows you to optimize a scene without losing any visual quality by automating the process of removing any hidden geometry. Let's dive in. So here we have this motor here. It's a very complex scene with over 800 objects, lots of materials. You can see this is actually generated from CAD data, so we have all of the information from the CAD file here in this scene. Now, let's say, for example, I want to do a real-time visualization of this model, but I don't need any of the interior. And so, yes, having the CAD data is really incredible because we have all that data, but I don't need all of that data. If I go ahead and hide this, the exterior panels here, you can see we have all these internal pieces, in which case for a visualization from the outside, I don't need this. So I need to remove all of this extra geometry. And luckily with occlusion culling, that's exactly what I can do. I can remove any of the geometry that we're never going to see from the outside. So with occlusion culling, we have two different modes. We have the automatic interior mode and we have the camera-based mode, and I'm going to show you both of them. So let's start off with automatic interior. What I want to do is I want to remove by polygon all the extra polygons that I'm not going to see. And instead of, we could just remove the geometry and delete it, or what we could do is we could write it into vertex colors or as optimizer weights. Now, if you recall back to the Polygon Optimizer section here of this session, what we did is we could paint the weights to choose where InstaLOD optimizes more or less of the asset. So we can automate that process by using occlusion culling to paint those optimizer weights for us. In this case, we're going to remove the geometry. I'm going to quickly set up the resolution, which I'll explain in a second, as well as this setting here, and I'll go ahead and hit start. So the way that I like to describe how occlusion culling works with the automatic interior mode is this. Let's pretend that we have a dome of cameras around this object and they're all firing off rays at this scene. Now, it's not exactly how it works, but it's a great way to visualize the settings, for example. So each of those cameras has a resolution, and so when we fire rays off at the scene, if a ray hits a polygon, it knows that it's visible and it's safe. If it doesn't hit a polygon, it's going to be removed because it's not visible from the outside. So let's say that you have a really, really dense mesh with lots of polygons. Well, you might not have enough rays to be able to fully cover this object, and you might end up with some holes. So what you could do is increase the amount of rays, but that also increases the amount of performance and time that it takes to run this process. So what you could do is supply an adjacency depth. Now, what the adjacency depth does, it says, well, if a ray hits a polygon, any n number of neighboring faces is also going to be safe. So the adjacency depth allows you to keep that resolution number lower, but also still preserve a lot of the detail. So you can see we're already done here. We've removed all the interior parts. From the outside, you can see that the quality looks exactly the same, and that's because it is. We haven't changed a single thing from the outside. So that's how we can optimize an object by getting the exact same level of quality as the input mesh. But we can see here, if I remove the exterior pieces, we've removed the internal geometry that we don't need. Now, you might notice that we have some floating pieces on the inside here, and that's because if I go ahead and unhide all these, we've got those fans, for example, those are visible from the outside. And so this would be a very tedious manual process to figure out what parts are visible from the outside and what parts aren't, but we can do this very quickly with occlusion culling. Now, I mentioned there's two modes, the automatic interior mode, but also the camera-based mode. And so what we can do is we can supply our own cameras to determine where this mesh is going to be viewed. So I'm going to go ahead and create a camera here. I'll go to the mesh menu, the create menu, and choose camera. You can see here down at the bottom of my hierarchy, we have a camera, and when we create a camera in InstaLOD, it's going to create a camera right where our viewport is. And then I'm going to go ahead and create another camera here. Let's say we want a close-up of this area as well, and I'll just use the keyboard shortcut Alt or Option C to create another camera. And so we have the mode set to camera based. I'm just going to increase the resolution because we only have two cameras that we're using in this case, and hit start. And I'll use the process scene to make this go a little bit quicker. Now you can see very quickly we're only firing off rays from the two cameras that I supplied here. And you can see from this angle, it looks absolutely perfect. If we go ahead down and find the other camera, and copy camera parameters to viewport. It looks perfect from this angle too, but as soon as I rotate, you can see that we've removed all of the unnecessary geometry here. So really, really powerful to use occlusion culling to only have the geometry that you need that's going to be visualized for the visualization. This has been a general overview of the core features of InstaLOD. With these many mesh operations, we can either chain them together or run them in parallel to build your custom mesh processing workflows. Now, to finish up our session today, I wanted to quickly go over a few additional features. AMD Radeon ProRender is a powerful physically based rendering engine that enables creative professionals to produce stunning photorealistic images. With our integration into InstaLOD Studio, we created a sleek and straightforward user interface, making rendering beautiful images an easy task without needing to worry about dozens of individual settings. Here I would like to create a velvet material for this armchair with some bronze legs. We'll start off by creating a new material. With the ProRender integration, we've extended the PBR material with additional parameters that can be used by the ray tracer for advanced rendering effects. I will enable the newly added sheen parameter. Let's go ahead and open up the ray trace window to review what this looks like right now. I'll talk you through all the individual settings in just a few minutes, but for now, let's just click play to start the render. What we can do now is change the material parameters and get instant feedback in the render view. We can even navigate in the viewport in the render window itself by enabling the viewport interaction icon. I would like to make the velvet a nice turquoise color. We can do this by simply changing the base color value. I will, however, be using a texture instead, so I will simply drag my file into the base color channel. To make the velvet really pop, I'm going to add a sheen tint and change the sheen color to a nice bright green. Now we can see the drastic change that this effect achieves. To make this a bit more realistic, I will reduce the tint intensity to around 0.5. Moving on to the legs, I'll be using a brownish base color, increase the metalness, and apply a worn, scratched texture to the roughness channel. Now let's move on to the render window and have a quick overview of some of the settings. First off, we can decide the size of the render image, including the amount of recursions and depth bounces. I will keep the maximum sample count on off to allow the renderer to render the image until I am satisfied with the result. The preview sample step allows me to have a preview of the render every X samples. I like setting this to 10 or 20 to allow for faster rendering, as the render then doesn't need to wait for the image to be displayed and updated before moving on with rendering additional samples. Then we can decide what hardware we want to use for rendering. We can mix and match available CPUs and GPUs as long as they are supported by Radeon ProRender. In the camera settings, we can decide what camera to render and add effects like depth of field. The tone mapping allows you to add some additional tweaks like adding a vignette or changing the exposure of the image. Post-processing filters like bloom or motion blur are also available for further enhancement of your images. Finally, we have our denoise settings. Denoising is a great way to generate low noise renders with just a few samples. I'm going to keep this off now, however. Now I'll quickly frame up a shot and add some depth of field. Whenever I'm happy with the rendered result, I can save out the render by going to File and Save Current Channel, which in this case is going to save out the final beauty render. If we select Save All Channels, we can get each individual AOV exported separately. InstaLOD Grid enables enterprise customers to easily establish an on-premise InstaLOD compute cluster. Customers that leverage InstaLOD Grid are able to expose every employee to the InstaLOD web application to process data with no additional cost and no application-specific training. The InstaLOD Grid server receives requests from operators through applications such as InstaLOD Studio or the built-in web application and automatically forwards it to an available node in the compute cluster. Once the data has been processed, the results can be downloaded through InstaLOD Studio or the InstaLOD Grid web application. Another fantastic feature is InstaLOD Watchdog, which can be used to trigger InstaLOD Grid. InstaLOD Watchdog is an automated data management solution that looks over and mirrors a dedicated folder structure. If changes are made to any file within the input folder structure, InstaLOD Watchdog recognizes this and reprocesses only those files that have been changed through InstaLOD pipeline. This system ensures that all files within a folder structure are up to date without needing to process thousands of files over again for changes made to a single file. Here we can see I have a work folder with all of my working files inside of their own subfolders. I would like all these files to be processed and exported into the InstaLOD folder using the same folder structure as the work folder. Let's start off by locating the folder that InstaLOD Watchdog should look over. With the command line open, we're going to change the directory using cd to navigate to our InstaLOD pipeline folder. I'm going to start off with InstaLOD CMD followed by the command profile. I want all the files in my folder structure to have LODs generated for them. So I'll be using the profile preset Optimize located within the InstaLOD pipeline profiles directory. Next, I will use the command watchdog and locate the folder that InstaLOD Watchdog should watch over. I will add 2 asterisks to notify Watchdog to look through all subfolders recursively instead of only looking for files within the work folder itself. Next, I need to add a search pattern. This could be as simple as **** to allow any file to match and be processed, or I could add multiple file formats. In my case, I'll be using ***fbx to process only the FBX files within the folder structure. I will then navigate InstaLOD Watchdog to the output folder where I want the processed files to be mirrored into. In this case, I'll be using the InstaLOD folder for this. Finally, we can specify the file naming format. You can find more information on available strings on our documentation website located at docs.instalod.io. To finish off the command, I will add the name of the profile, which in our case is Optimize Demo. Now I can hit enter on my keyboard and let InstaLOD Watchdog run. As this is the first run-through of InstaLOD, no files are currently located in the output folder. Therefore, InstaLOD Watchdog is currently building the correct folder structure and then processing every single file to generate the individual LODs. InstaLOD is now done with processing. If we run InstaLOD Watchdog again, we can see that it recognizes that no changes have been made since our last process. Let's go ahead and change that. For this demonstration, I'm going to duplicate the car hood file and rename it, and run InstaLOD Watchdog once more. Here we can see how InstaLOD Watchdog recognized the new file, processed it, and mirrored it over to the correct output directory. InstaLOD Watchdog can also be run through an InstaLOD grid network by simply adding the command master with the IP address and port number, followed by the user's login details. Finally, instead of starting InstaLOD Watchdog manually after every edited file, we can automate this process to run, for example, every half hour, or every Friday at 8 p.m., or any other custom time setup that you might need. Thank you very much for watching this session. If you have any questions, please reach out to our sales and support teams. And to learn more about InstaLOD, you can go to our documentation website and also browse through our videos on our YouTube channel. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. For the latest news about InstaLOD, please visit our website and follow us on Twitter. You can find all the links in the video description below. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.